Dr. James Miller stood at the entrance of the massive alien spacecraft, his medical bag clutched tightly in his hand. The metallic corridors stretched before him, illuminated by the soft blue glow of alien technology. As Earth's leading expert in experimental medicine, he had been chosen to represent humanity in this first major medical exchange with the advanced alien civilization known as the Bright Ones. The Bright Ones had arrived on Earth 3 years ago, bringing with them technological wonders beyond human imagination. But despite their advances, they had sought out human medical expertise for reasons that remained unclear. Their ambassador, Lord Thex, had specifically requested Dr. Miller's presence on their mothership. As two tall, luminescent guards led him through the winding passages, James couldn't shake off his unease. The Bright Ones, with their translucent skin that seemed to shimmer with internal light, had always maintained an air of superiority over humans. Their technological achievements had given them a certain arrogance that made this request for help all the more puzzling. The doors to Lord Thex's private chambers slid open with a soft hiss. The alien lord stood by a large window overlooking Earth, his form radiating a cold, blue light. But it was the figure in the hovering medical pod that caught James's attention, a young alien girl, perhaps equivalent to a human teenager, lying motionless except for her eyes. Dr. Miller, Lord Thex's voice carried a mixture of disdain and desperate hope. I have heard humans possess a peculiar ability to achieve results through what you call compassion and determination. My daughter, Aurora, has been paralyzed by a neural degradation that our most advanced medical technology cannot cure. James approached the pod, his trained eyes already assessing the patient. Aurora's crystalline eyes followed his movement, intelligence and frustration evident in their depths. Our finest minds have failed, Lord Thex continued, his voice taking on a mocking tone. So I thought, why not let a primitive human try? If nothing else, it might prove once and for all the superiority of our methods. You may treat her as you see fit, Doctor. Consider her your project. The condescension in Lord Thex's voice was clear, but James barely noticed it. His full attention was on Aurora, whose eyes had locked with his. In that moment, he saw something the Bright Ones had missed, a fierce determination that matched his own. I accept, James said simply, already pulling out his diagnostic tools. But I'll need to transfer her to my medical facility on Earth. Your daughter isn't a project, Lord Thex. She's my patient. The alien lord waved his hand dismissively. Do as you wish. You have 6 Earth months. Though I doubt even that will be enough for your primitive methods to show any results. As James began preliminary scans of Aurora's neural patterns, he noticed something extraordinary. While her body was indeed paralyzed, her neural activity was unlike anything he'd ever seen. It wasn't degraded, it was evolving. The Bright Ones, so focused on fixing what they saw as broken, had missed something crucial. This wasn't a story of repair, James realized. This was going to be a journey of transformation. And in Aurora's determined gaze, he saw the first glimpse of something that would soon shake the very foundation of both their species' understanding of strength. The Earth-based medical facility gleamed with a mixture of human and alien technology. Dr. James Miller had spent the last week setting up a specialized treatment room for Aurora, combining the best of both worlds. The young alien's hovering medical pod now rested in the center of the room, surrounded by an array of monitors displaying her neural patterns. Your neural activity is unlike anything I've ever seen, James explained to Aurora, whose crystalline eyes followed his movements with keen interest. He had quickly discovered that while she couldn't speak, she could communicate through a series of blinks, 1 for yes, 2 for no. It's not degrading as your father believes. It's changing. Aurora blinked once, emphatically. Her internal light pulsed slightly brighter, something James had begun to recognize as excitement. You knew? James asked, leaning closer to the monitors. You could feel it happening? 1 blink. James ran his hand through his graying hair, mind racing with possibilities. The traditional treatments failed because they were trying to reverse something that wasn't actually damage. Your neural pathways aren't breaking down, they're evolving into something new. As he spoke, the neural pattern displays suddenly spiked. James watched in amazement as waves of energy cascaded through Aurora's neural map, creating patterns that defied conventional medical understanding. Then something extraordinary happened. A small data pad on the nearby table shifted slightly. James blinked, wondering if he'd imagined it. "Aurora, did you do that?" One blink, followed by a surge of internal light that made her whole body glow brighter. "Telekinesis," James whispered, understanding dawning. "Your physical paralysis isn't a disease, it's a chrysalis. Your mind is developing abilities that your body can't handle yet." He quickly began adjusting the monitors to track the energy outputs. "Your people's advanced technology actually hindered your progress. They were so focused on fixing what they thought was broken, they didn't realize you were transforming." Over the next several hours, James worked with Aurora to test her newfound abilities. The data pad would move small distances, and occasionally other light objects would shift. Each attempt left Aurora exhausted, her internal light dimming slightly, but her determination never wavered. That evening, as James recorded his findings, a transmission from Lord Thex arrived. The alien lord's familiar condescending tone filled the room. "Dr. Miller, I trust you're documenting your inevitable failure adequately? It has been a week, and I see no reports of improvement in Aurora's condition." James looked at Aurora, who gave him a slight nod. "Actually, Lord Thex, we've made significant discoveries. Your daughter's condition isn't what we thought." "Spare me your primitive interpretations," Lord Thex interrupted. "Either she can move, or she cannot. Which is it?" James felt a surge of frustration, but before he could respond, something remarkable happened. The data pad that Aurora had been practicing with suddenly lifted smoothly into the air, floating steadily in front of the transmission screen. Lord Thex's superior expression faltered for the first time. What trickery is this?" the alien lord demanded. "No trickery," James replied calmly. "Your daughter is developing abilities that your advanced technology couldn't detect. She doesn't need to be fixed, Lord Thex. She needs to be helped to grow." The data pad gently settled back onto the table as Aurora's energy depleted, but the impact of the demonstration was undeniable. Lord Thex's transmission ended abruptly, leaving the room in silence. James turned to Aurora, whose eyes shone with a mixture of exhaustion and triumph. "That was dangerous," he said softly. "You're not strong enough yet for sustained demonstrations." Aurora blinked once, then twice, then once again, a pattern they hadn't established. James understood anyway. She was telling him that sometimes risks were necessary to make people see the truth. And this was just the beginning of what she could do. 2 months into Aurora's treatment, the medical facility had become a place of both wonder and concern. Word of her developing abilities had spread through the Bright One's hierarchy, leading to increased surveillance and frequent inspections by their scientists. James watched as another group of alien researchers left the facility, their internal lights pulsing with barely concealed agitation. "They're afraid," James said quietly, closing the door. "Not of you, exactly, but of what you represent." He turned to Aurora, whose control over her telekinetic abilities had grown remarkably. She now kept several objects floating around her medical pod at all times, as if practicing. The young alien's eyes crinkled in what James had come to recognize as her version of a smile. A notepad floated to him, words forming on it as Aurora focused her energy. This was their newest breakthrough, she could now manipulate objects with enough precision to write. "They should be," appeared on the pad in slightly shaky letters. "Father most of all." James sat down beside her pod, concerned by the bitterness in her written words. "Your father does care for you, Aurora. He's just blinded by his beliefs about what you should be." The notepad shook slightly. He cares about his reputation. About power. The other bright ones are the same. They think they're perfect. But I'm becoming something they can't control. Before James could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. Red lights flashed as security protocols activated. Through the window, James could see several Bright One ships descending from the sky, their designs distinctly military. "This is Lord Thex," a voice boomed through the facility's communication system. "The human experiment ends now. Our research indicates that the neural mutations in Aurora are becoming unstable. We will resume control of her treatment using proper methods." James quickly began activating the facility's data backup systems, preserving all their research. "They're wrong, Aurora. Your patterns are stable, they're just different from anything they've seen before." He looked at the approaching ships. "But they won't understand. They'll try to force you back to what you were." The notepad filled with urgent words. "I won't go back. I can't. Help me, James." The doctor stood firmly between Aurora's pod and the door. "I won't let them take you. You're my patient, and more importantly, you're my friend. But we need a plan." Suddenly, every loose object in the room began to float. Aurora's internal light blazed brighter than James had ever seen it, her eyes fixed on the ceiling. The notepad wrote one final message: "I have a plan. Trust me." The facility's doors burst open as Bright One soldiers entered, their weapons ready. Lord Thex strode in behind them, his usual aristocratic demeanor replaced by cold anger. "Step aside, Dr. Miller. Your primitive attempts at treatment end now. Aurora will return to proper care under our supervision." James stood his ground. "Your daughter isn't sick, and she doesn't need to be fixed. She's evolving. If you just listen." "Enough." Lord Thex gestured to his soldiers. "Remove him." But as the soldiers approached, something extraordinary happened. Aurora's medical pod began to glow with an intense light that filled the entire room. Every piece of equipment, every tool, every loose object rose into the air, swirling in a controlled vortex around her. James watched in awe as Aurora's eyes opened wide, and for the first time since he'd met her, her mouth moved. The words that came out were soft but clear: "No more." The floating objects formed a barrier between them and the soldiers. Lord Thex stepped back, his internal light flickering with what looked like fear. "This is impossible. The neural degradation should have prevented any physical control." "It never was degradation," James said firmly, understanding now the full scope of Aurora's transformation. "It was evolution. And you just proved why she needed a doctor who could see her strength instead of trying to fix what wasn't broken." The medical facility had become a battlefield of wills. Aurora's telekinetic barrier held strong, keeping the Bright One soldiers at bay while objects continued to orbit around her pod in a mesmerizing dance of control and power. Her father, Lord Thex, watched with a mixture of fear and fascination as his daughter demonstrated abilities that should have been impossible. "Your neural patterns were damaged," Lord Thex insisted, though his voice had lost its usual certainty. "Our best scientists confirmed it. This cannot be real." Aurora's voice, though still soft, carried throughout the room. "You saw damage because you couldn't imagine change. You couldn't accept that I might become something different from you." The objects spinning around her moved faster, their orbits tightening. "Something more." James stood nearby, monitoring Aurora's vital signs on the few pieces of equipment that weren't floating. "Her neural activity is completely stable," he reported. "Different from both human and Bright One patterns, but perfectly sustainable. She's not losing control, she's gaining it." Lord Thex's internal light pulsed with agitation. "You presume too much, human. Our civilization has existed for millennia. We have mapped every possible variation of our species' development. What you suggest is impossible." "Impossible?" Aurora's voice grew stronger. The medical pod that had been her prison for so long began to glow with the same intense light that emanated from her body. You mapped every possibility except the one where we could grow beyond your expectations. Beyond your control. Suddenly, Aurora's body began to rise from the pod. The soldiers raised their weapons, but Lord Thex held up his hand, transfixed by the sight of his daughter moving on her own for the first time in years. James watched in amazement as Aurora floated free of the pod, her body suspended in the air by her own power. Her formerly paralyzed limbs moved smoothly, as if she had never lost control of them. The light within her body pulsed with rainbow hues, unlike the cold blue of the other bright ones. The paralysis, James realized aloud, it wasn't just your body adapting to new neural patterns. You were in a cocoon, transforming into something entirely new. Aurora turned to face her father, now floating at eye level with him. Dr. Miller saw what you couldn't. He didn't try to force me back to what I was. He helped me become what I could be. She gestured, and all the floating objects gently returned to their places. The question now, Father, is whether you can accept what I've become. Lord Thex stood frozen, his aristocratic composure shattered. The soldiers looked to him for orders, their weapons still raised but their stance uncertain. The mighty Lord of the Bright Ones faced a choice: accept a change that challenged everything his civilization believed, or reject his own daughter's transformation. If you try to fix me, Aurora continued, her voice gentle but firm, you'll only prove that despite all your advancement, you're still trapped by your own limitations. But if you can open your mind. She extended her hand toward her father, offering connection instead of conflict. James watched the standoff, knowing that this moment would define not just Aurora's future, but potentially the relationship between humans and Bright Ones. In the young alien's transformation, he saw the possibility of breaking down the barriers of prejudice and superiority that had marked their species' interactions. Lord Thex looked at his daughter's offered hand, then at the human doctor who had helped her achieve what his civilization had deemed impossible. His internal light flickered through a rainbow of colors, mirroring his internal struggle. Perhaps, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper, there are some things we still have to learn. News of Aurora's transformation spread through the Bright One community like wildfire. The medical facility had become a gathering point for curious onlookers, both human and alien, all trying to catch a glimpse of the changed young woman who floated through its halls with rainbow light streaming from her form. 2 weeks after the confrontation, James sat in his office, reviewing data with Lord Thex. The alien lord's demeanor had changed dramatically since accepting his daughter's transformation. Gone was the cold superiority, replaced by an almost humble curiosity. These readings suggest it wasn't just Aurora's neural patterns that changed, James explained, pointing to the complex diagrams on his screen. Her entire cellular structure has evolved. She's still a Bright One, but she's also something more. And you believe others of our kind might have this potential? Lord Thex asked, his internal light pulsing with interest. Before James could answer, Aurora floated through the wall, another new ability that still startled them both. Her light cast rainbow patterns across the office as she moved. Not just our kind, Father, she said, her voice carrying the melodic quality it had developed since her transformation. I've been studying both species. The potential for evolution exists in humans too. Different, but equally remarkable. James looked up in surprise. Humans? But we don't have your species' natural energy manipulation abilities. Aurora smiled, raising her hand. A holographic display appeared above it, showing intertwined DNA structures of both species. Your kind has something else, adaptability. The very thing that helped you understand my condition when our own scientists couldn't. Your minds are naturally flexible, open to possibilities we never considered. Lord Thex stood, moving closer to examine the display. The Council of Elders is in an uproar over this. Half believe Aurora's transformation is a sign of things to come, while others He paused, looking ashamed. Others fear it threatens everything we believed about our superiority. Fear of change, James mused, seems to be universal across species. Aurora waved her hand, changing the holographic display to show a model of neural pathways. But so is the ability to overcome that fear. Look at these patterns, Father. Human and Bright One minds are different, but they complement each other perfectly. Where we have power, they have flexibility. Where we have knowledge, they have creativity. As if to demonstrate, she created a complex light sculpture in the air, a double helix formed of intertwining human and Bright One DNA, spinning slowly and casting prismatic shadows across the room. The Council has requested a formal presentation, Lord Thex announced, his light pulsing with what James now recognized as pride. They want to understand how a human doctor succeeded where our medical technology failed. James shook his head. I didn't succeed where your technology failed. I just asked different questions. Instead of trying to fix what looked broken, I tried to understand what was actually happening. The real breakthrough was Aurora's courage to become something new. Aurora's light brightened at his words. And that's what we need to show them. Not just my transformation, but the transformation of understanding between our species. She turned to her father. Will you help us? Lord Thexa's internal light shifted through several colors before settling on a warm gold, a color James had never seen in a Bright One before. Yes. It's time our people learned that true advancement comes not from believing in our superiority, but from being open to change. James watched father and daughter, marveling at how far they'd come. What had started as a mockingly given project had become a bridge between two species, opening doors to possibilities neither had imagined. So, he said with a smile, shall we start preparing that presentation? The grand chamber of the Bright One Council towered above the Earth's surface, a massive crystalline structure that floated among the clouds. James stood before the semicircle of 12 council members, their combined light casting the chamber in a harsh blue glow. Aurora floated beside him, her rainbow luminescence standing in stark contrast to the traditional blue of her people. You claim this transformation is natural evolution, spoke the head counselor, his light pulsing with skepticism. Yet in 10,000 years of our civilization, nothing like this has ever been documented. Perhaps, Aurora replied before James could speak, that's because for 10,000 years, we've been too focused on perfecting what we are to imagine what we could become. She created a holographic display showing her neural patterns before and after the change. We called any deviation from our standard patterns a defect. We never considered they might be growth. Another council member leaned forward, her light dimming with concern. And you suggest this human's primitive method somehow catalyzed this evolution? This is dangerous thinking. Our medical sciences are far superior. Are they? Lord Thex interrupted, stepping forward to join his daughter. Our superior sciences failed to help Aurora. They failed because we were too proud to consider alternatives. His light shifted to match his daughter's rainbow hues for a brief moment. Too proud to learn. James cleared his throat, drawing the council's attention. If I may demonstrate something? At their nod, he activated a large display screen. These are comparative scans of healthy Bright One neural patterns and Aurora's current state. Watch what happens when we overlay them. The patterns merged on screen, dancing and interweaving. Where they touched, new patterns emerged, more complex than either original. Evolution isn't about superiority, James explained. It's about adaptation, growth, and sometimes, cooperation. Aurora's transformation wasn't just physical, it represented a new way of thinking, of being. And it was only possible because she was willing to trust someone your society considered inferior. Suddenly, alarms blared throughout the chamber. Emergency lights flashed as multiple screens activated, showing a massive solar flare heading toward Earth. The council members rose in alarm. Our planetary shields won't fully deploy for another hour, one counselor shouted. The Earth's magnetic field isn't strong enough to deflect a flare of this magnitude. Millions could die. Aurora's eyes met James's, and understanding passed between them. Without a word, she flew to the chamber's apex, her body glowing brighter than ever before. Aurora, wait! Lord Thex called out. Even with your new abilities, you can't possibly. I can, she interrupted, her voice ringing with confidence. Not because I'm superior, but because I'm different. Because I learned to be more than what everyone thought I should be. She turned to the council. Watch and understand what becomes possible when we stop fearing change. Aurora's form began to pulse with energy. Her rainbow light expanded outward, forming a massive shield that stretched across the sky. As the solar flare struck, her energy field absorbed and redirected it, creating a spectacular display of Aurora Borealis across the globe. The council chamber fell silent as they watched Aurora single-handedly accomplish what their most advanced technology couldn't. When she finally returned to the chamber, her light was dimmer but her presence stronger than ever. This is what evolution looks like, James said into the silence. Not a rejection of what you are, but an expansion of what you can become. Aurora isn't just a singular anomaly, she's a glimpse of possibilities that exist in all of us, human and bright one alike. Lord Thex stepped forward, addressing his fellow council members. The choice before us is clear. We can cling to our beliefs about superiority and perfection, or we can embrace the potential for change. My daughter has shown us the way. The question is, are we brave enough to follow? 1 year after the solar flare incident, the medical facility where Aurora's transformation began had grown into something much more, the first Joint Evolution Research Center. James stood at its entrance, watching as both Human and Bright One students filed in for their daily studies. Inside his office, now lined with windows that showed both Earth and space, Aurora was teaching a group of young Bright Ones. Her rainbow light filled the room as she demonstrated how to channel their energy in new ways. Among her students were several who showed signs of beginning their own transformations, their traditional blue light occasionally flickering with new colors. Remember, Aurora said to her students, transformation isn't about rejecting who you are. It's about being brave enough to become more than you thought possible. She created a complex light sculpture that represented the intertwining DNA patterns of both species. Each of us has this potential within us. Different, but equally valuable. Lord Thex entered the room, accompanied by a group of human scientists. The former alien lord, now the head of the Joint Council for Evolution Studies, nodded approvingly at his daughter's lesson. His own internal light had begun showing traces of other colors, a change that was becoming more common among Bright Ones who worked closely with humans. The latest results are promising, he announced to the room. We've identified similar transformation markers in 3 more young Bright Ones, and fascinating adaptations in some of our human colleagues. He smiled at James. It seems your species' remarkable adaptability is catching. James nodded, thinking of the recent discoveries. Some humans working closely with the Bright Ones had begun developing a subtle luminescence of their own, not as dramatic as their alien counterparts, but significant nonetheless. Evolution, it seemed, worked both ways. To think, James mused, all of this started because you mockingly gave me a patient you thought was beyond help. My greatest mistake, Lord Thex admitted, and my greatest blessing. I thought I was proving our superiority. Instead, I learned that true strength often comes in forms we don't expect. Aurora finished her lesson and floated over to join them. And the council? How did they take the latest reports? Better than expected, her father replied. It's hard to argue with success. The number of cooperative breakthroughs between our species has quadrupled since we established this center. Even the most conservative council members are beginning to see the benefits of change. Through the windows, they could see Earth and space meeting in a beautiful horizon. Aurora created a light display that matched it, showing the potential futures branching out before them like a glowing tree of possibility. "We were so focused on being perfect," she said softly, "that we forgot how to grow. It took a human doctor, seeing strength where others saw weakness, to remind us that imperfection often holds the seeds of something greater." James watched as Human and Bright One students mingled in the hallway outside, sharing ideas and abilities with equal enthusiasm. "Perfect is boring," he said with a smile. "I'll take interesting over perfect any day." "The question," Lord Thex added, his light pulsing with warm colors, "is no longer whether we are superior to each other, but how much stronger we can become together." Aurora's rainbow light brightened the entire room as she created one final display, an image of Earth and the Bright One homeworld orbiting a common sun, connected by streams of multicolored light. "This is just the beginning," she said. "We've learned that strength comes in many forms. Sometimes it looks like power, sometimes like paralysis. Sometimes it looks like pride, and sometimes like humility." She turned to James, the human doctor who had seen her true potential when everyone else saw only limitations. "But most often, strength looks like the courage to change, to trust, to become something new. Not alone, but together." Outside, the sun set on Earth while rising on the Bright One world, creating a continuous dawn that symbolized their shared future, one where evolution meant not the triumph of one species over another, but the courage to grow beyond what either thought possible.